Anderson in his prime, man, was something special. He had achieved that state, you know, this elusive state of total flow. And he had achieved that against some of the best fighters in the world. You know, when you see him, when he was at his very best, and I just feel very fortunate to have been there to watch some of those fights. What was so phenomenal about Anderson was that you would just watch him hit that flow state. You know, he would size guys up too. You would see him move around. He would start moving around. He would test you a little bit, move around. Yeah, he would give you a minute or two, and you'd be like, "Man, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm doing pretty good in this fight." And then all of a sudden, you start opening up on you, and you're like, "Oh shit, here it comes. Here it comes."
He's the greatest fighter in the world. I mean, the guy's so incredibly talented.
When he set Vitor up with that front kick, fucking goddamn.
I don't know about you, never seen anything like that in my life.
Video game. That's the only place I've ever seen something like that.
On the 25th of October 2020, Khabib Nurmagomedov retired from professional MMA. He retired with a perfect 29-0 record, having won almost every round of every fight. For years to come, he'll be recognised by many as the most dominant lightweight of all time, and in contention to be the pound-for-pound greatest of all time. Even though he was pushed to retirement due to his father's death, Khabib couldn't have chosen a better moment to go out on. At the height of his career, the height of his fame, and with a completely unblemished record, Khabib left his gloves in the octagon and walked off into the Fight Island sunset. Not long after this, another legend of the sport, Anderson Silva, has announced his retirement. Silva and Nurmagomedov's retirements, for fighters both considered to be GOAT contenders, couldn't be more different. Silva has been fighting as a pro since the late 90s, and despite an incredible career, he's retiring long past his prime, aged 45 and having lost 7 of his last 9 fights, with 1 win and 1 no contest. Instead of retiring at the peak of his career like Nurmagomedov, Silva's retiring having horribly tarnished one of the most illustrious careers in MMA. The last time we saw a winning, prime Anderson Silva was long ago, in the olden days of 2012. The last time Silva held a world title, we were still playing on Xbox 360s and PlayStation 3s, and Call Me Maybe was the feel-good hit of the summer. Breaking Bad was still airing, and the world wasn't actively on fire. Silva's heyday was so long ago, his winning form so far in the past, that it can be difficult at times to remember that once upon a time, Anderson Silva was so good, so dominant, so creative with his violence, that people legitimately had to resort to conspiracy theories that all his fights were fixed to explain how he dominated every single opponent with absolute ease. Silva's pro career began in 1997. He fought in various Muay Thai promotions in Brazil, and this early stage of the Spider's career culminated with Silva fighting in Japan and becoming the Shooto welterweight champion. In 2002, Silva fought for Pride, and while he had some good wins there, such as an impressive flying knee TKO over former UFC champ Carlos Newton, he lost via a triangle to Daiju Takase, who was a huge underdog at the time. and eventually Silva was cut from Pride's roster after losing via a flying scissor heel hook against a journeyman named Reuploaded. During this time, he was also fighting for Cage Rage, and by 2006 he had become the Cage Rage middleweight champion and had started to put together some of his most impressive highlight reel finishes, such as the reverse elbow KO against Tony Franklin, or the time he just let Jorge Rivera punch him in the face for a fucking laugh.
If he catches Anderson with a shoot,
and look at that, he's fighting exactly as Anderson Silva did in the first round.
He was just laughing at him. Anderson was just like, he was just taking the shots.
As good as Silva was in the early days, it wasn't until he joined the UFC that we really saw what the Spider was capable of. It's extremely rare in any professional sport to see an evolution of that sport happen right before your eyes. These things take time, but with Silva's appearance in the UFC, you could see right before your eyes that here was a striker whose skill level was years ahead of his peers. He was so much better than everyone he fought in the UFC that it seemed almost unfair. Silva was out here playing 5-dimensional chess while the rest were, finger painting with their own shit. His first fight in the UFC was against Chris Lieben. Lieben was a heavy favourite to win and was on a 5-fight win streak at that point. Anderson made it look easy. He brutalised Lieben with punches and kicks and finished him in the first round without barely breaking a sweat. He had an almost unheard of 85% striking accuracy. After the Lieben fight, the UFC was truly welcomed to the Spider era. Silva went on a tear that still hasn't been equalled. 16 back-to-back wins. Aside from decision wins against Thales Leites and Damian Maia, 14 of those 16 were by KO, TKO or submission. The toughest fight of his career by that date was his first fight against Chael Sonnen, where Sonnen dominated Anderson for 4.5 rounds until, well, if you believe the conspiracy theories at the time, what Anderson had actually done was play possum for 4.5 rounds until he got bored and finished Sonnen with a triangle with only seconds to go. Some people said he had bet on himself to win via submission in the last half of the 4th round, and that's how fucking good Anderson was back then, that even when you heard a completely bullshit rumour like that, a little voice in your head said, yeah, but maybe he did do that. Silva's reign wasn't completely unblemished though. Silva had a knack for choosing the best, worst possible moments to really piss off Dana White. Most infamously at UFC 112, Invincible. UFC 112 was held in Abu Dhabi, and the UFC was pushing big to make a name for themselves in the Middle East. Yeah, this was also back in the day when the UFC put subtitles after their event numbers. Subtitles like Invincible, Punishment, Cockblock, which is one of the few staples of the tap out / just bleed era that I really don't miss at all. Well, that and the tap out shirts and the rampant PEDs. But I'll never give up Face the Pain, ever. But anyway, this was back in the day when the UFC was rarely seen outside of the US. And for those of you who don't know, Abu Dhabi has been the home of one of the biggest submission grappling tournaments in the world, the ADCC, since 1998. So Abu Dhabi was fertile soil for Dana to plant his seed in.
That's fucking illegal.
This card had to be nothing but the best of the best. The UFC booked Anderson Silva versus Damian Maia for the main event. The best striker in the UFC versus the best jiu-jitsu fighter. How could that fail to deliver? Well, Silva could apparently become bored after 2 rounds and spend 3 rounds just clowning, taunting, and eventually getting warned by the ref for inactivity.
Is this your lowest moment as president of UFC?
No doubt about it. Absolutely, 100%.
But Silva being Silva, even this high-profile moment of being utterly awful was seen by many at the time as Silva just being so bored by his lack of competition that he could afford to clown around the octagon like it was his own personal 3-ring fucking circus, or like some genius kid in school acting out because the rest of the class is moving too slowly for him. Silva's reign was record-breaking in almost every way imaginable. The only record he hasn't got is most times stripped of the title, and that one is still safe in John Jones' hands. As 2012 drew to a close, Silva finished off the year with another classic Silva TKO win over Stephan Bonnar. Silva was the greatest fighter in the world at this point. He'd won every accolade possible in the sport of MMA. Even Chael Sonnen, the one fighter who had dominated Silva for 4 rounds, was brutally dispatched by Silva in the second round of their rematch, pouring more fuel onto the fire that Silva had thrown 4.5 rounds in their first fight. Had Silva retired after the Stephan Bonnar fight, aside from the ugliness surrounding UFC 112, his career status as the greatest of all time would be absolutely ironclad. But as the saying goes, time makes fools of us all. And in Silva's case, it was a combination of time and his own love of clowning that made a fool of him. At UFC 162 on July 6th, 2013, Silva was scheduled to face the All-American Chris Weidman. Weidman's UFC career pre-Silva fight was fine, I guess. Solid yet unspectacular, I think, would be the best way to describe it. His biggest win prior to the Silva fight was a decision win over Demian Maia. The rest of his resume at that point was wins over people I've never even heard of, such as Jesse Bongfeld and Alessio Sakara.
Who the fuck is that guy?
I don't recall there being much hype around this fight other than people wondering what kind of magical, mystical kung fu shit will Anderson do this time around. Weidman's not incredibly impressive resume left most people feeling like he was just another sacrificial lamb for the Spider. In the second round, Silva was doing some peak Anderson shit, clowning around the octagon, pretending to be hurt, dropping his guard completely and just using head movement to dodge punches, until a punch he was supposed to dodge clipped him square on the chin. And suddenly, the once invincible Anderson Silva wasn't pretending to be hurt anymore. Anderson fell to the canvas, Weidman rained down punches, and the fight was waved off. After 2,457 days, the Spider's reign was over. Weidman's KO of Silva is up there with Holmes' KO of Rousey, Bisping's KO of Rockhold, or Serra's KO of GSP in terms of stunning upsets. No one was out here saying Weidman is going to win this by KO. And if they tell you that today,
why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
Betting against Silva in 2013 was as dumb as betting against Khabib in 2020.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
But the Weidman loss was just the beginning of Silva's slow decline and the overall tarnishing of his once immaculate career. Following the KO loss to Weidman, the narrative going into the rematch was that Anderson only lost because of his antics. If he'd taken the fight seriously, he'd never have lost.
Definitely lucky.
So do you see it as a lucky win on Chris's part then?
Man, you guys are too much.
And in the rematch, Silva looked far more focused and did away with the clowning, but still got badly rocked and dropped by Weidman in the first round. And then, infamously, in round 2, Silva threw a leg kick that Weidman checked with his knee and shattered Silva's leg. Just as an aside here, I'd like to take a moment to say fuck you, Chris Weidman. Fuck you and your fat all-American fucking head. Silva's downfall is all your fault. You ruined him. If you hadn't checked that fucking kick, he'd still be middleweight champion. It's all your fucking fault. You fucking fat-headed all-American cock. Fuck you, Chris Weidman. You're ruined my life, you cunt.
Jeff Munson here. You like watching people get fucked for free? Watch me fuck up Mark Kerr for free.
This was the real beginning of the end for Silva. Most people at the time saw the leg break combined with Silva's age as being the end of his career. He'd need at least a year's recovery time, which would make him 41 or 42 by the time he could potentially come back, which everyone thought was far too old for the Spider to return.
You thought wrong.
Incredibly, only 14 months later, Silva returned to fight Nick Diaz. Silva won a unanimous decision in a very weird fight that saw Diaz doing what Diaz does best by taunting Silva constantly, even lying down in the octagon and stretching out for a bit, hoping to get Silva to engage with him on the ground. Silva outworked Diaz and won the unanimous decision, and showing real emotion, he burst into tears in the octagon after getting his first win since losing the title. But Silva's joy was short-lived, as the win was turned into a no contest after Silva popped for PEDs and Diaz popped for weed. The PED accusations are a tough one to swallow when it comes to Silva. He stated that he only used the PEDs to help recover from the broken leg, which honestly I don't have a problem with if that's actually true. But it also casts a shadow over his early career, because who's to say he wasn't juicing all along? He fought during the Wild West pre-USADA years of steroid abuse, where we had specimens such as TRT Vitor and Uberim. And it's also worth pointing out that his career skid not only coincided with the leg break, but also with the rise of USADA. I'm not going to chronicle every post-Weidman loss Silva had since then. He's had 1 win, 7 losses, and a no contest since 2013, and that's a hell of a steep decline for a fighter who was once so dominant it felt like it would take one of the fucking Avengers to go in there and beat him. Silva seemed to be stuck in the same kind of trap as BJ Penn, a once dominant fighter on a losing skid who just wants one last emphatic win before riding off into the sunset, but is just unable to break that losing streak. So, how does this affect the Spider's legacy? Silva's dominant reign lasted from 2006 to 2012. His fall from grace has actually lasted even longer, from 2013 to 2020. If Silva had retired after the second Weidman loss, his career wouldn't be tarnished at all. 1 KO loss due to clowning, and 1 loss due to a freak accident doesn't tarnish his legacy at all. But if you're going to talk about a career that spans 14 years, you can't ignore 7 years worth of fighting just because they were 7 years of losses. Silva has been in decline almost as long as Conor McGregor's entire career at this point. It doesn't spoil his early wins. Prime Silva is still one of the greatest fighters of all time, without a doubt. No one can take 2006 to 2012 away from him. For a boxing counterpart, look at Muhammad Ali. He's still considered the GOAT, even though his career ran on years longer than it should have, and ended with horrific fights like Ali vs Holmes, where Ali was already showing signs of Parkinson's yet still fighting. But you can't discuss Silva in 2020 without recognising that he's been actively fighting for 7 years now, and all he has to show for it is a single win over Derek Brunson. Silva just had his final fight in the UFC, a KO loss to Uriah Hall, and Uncle Dana has publicly stated post-fight that he should never have made this in the first place. And reading that, I just had to say, fuck you, Dana White. Fuck you, not only for putting on this fight in the first place, but then acting like you had no idea Silva could get murked by a guy who's famous for ending people with vicious knockouts. You really thought a guy like Hall was going to go out and get schooled by a 45-year-old washed-up Anderson Silva? Really? And not content with trying to distance himself from a fight he himself promoted, After all that, he throws Hall under the bus by shitting all over his performance? Fuck you, Dana White. If you were really worried about Anderson getting KO'd in his final fight, you would have put him up against some other old, broken down fighter, not against a young guy who almost murdered someone on The Ultimate Fighter with a spinning back kick. It was a genuinely heartbreaking loss to witness. But honestly, if you're a Silva fan, the last 7 years have just been one long, drawn-out heartbreak. But that heartbreak is finally coming to an end, hopefully, as Silva has kind of cryptically announced his retirement without actually saying he's retired. At the very least, Dana has said he won't offer Silva any more fights. So here's hoping we don't see Silva go to Bellator or, God forbid, Bare Knuckle FC. As long as Silva stays retired, his career can't become any more tarnished, and we'll always have his jab KO of Forrest Griffin, his reverse elbow KO of Tony Franklin, the Vitor front kick that he learned from Sensei Seagal, and we'll always have the 6 years of domination that came to be known as the Spider Era.